and welcome to the Better Tennessee Teachers Hour. My name is Dr. Stephanie Hill. A Delaware native, went to Howard University, have a PhD from University of Tennessee, Knoxville, and currently live in Memphis, Tennessee, where I've resided for the last 9 years and have worked primarily in the space of education and nonprofit and have been a avid just educator, community activist, and working for the best community possible here in Memphis, Tennessee, and across the state of Tennessee for our children. Tonight's panel discussion is brought to you by the J.B. Smiley Jr. for Governor campaign. Tonight we'll hear about education in Tennessee from a teacher's perspective. Nelson Mandela said that education is the most powerful weapon which you can use to change the world. And with that in mind, it's absolutely imperative that we honor the experiences and perspectives of the teachers responsible for educating our children. We brought together a panel of dynamic educators from across the state of Tennessee to share their perspectives about a range of important topics. Before we begin with our panelists, we're going to see a short video about Councilman Smiley and his campaign for governor.
Go with me to a better Tennessee.
Come and go with me to that land. Come and go with me to that land.
Come and go with me to that land where I'm bound, oh Lord, where I'm bound. There'll be freedom in that land where I am bound. I am bound. Yes, there'll be freedom in that land where I am bound.
I'm J.B. Smiley Jr. I grew up singing this song in church. You may know it as well. While the melodies may differ, its message of peace, freedom, and justice for all people unites us as Tennesseans. So today, I'm announcing my run for governor, and I'm inviting you all to come and go with me to a better Tennessee. I grew up in Memphis, in one of the poorest zip codes in the state. But my shot out was perfecting this shot and going to college on both an academic and basketball scholarship. Then I got a law degree to help give back, and I am proudly serving my community on the Memphis City Council. I decided to run for governor because right now there are too many shots fired, not enough shots given, and too few shots for our young people to reach their full potential. As governor, I will reduce crime by implementing a robust community policing program. And I'll fund prevention programs focused on those most likely to commit violent crime, because everyone deserves to be safe in their homes and communities. I will encourage folks across this state to do right by each other. That means getting vaccinated. And I'll ensure Tennesseans have access to healthcare no matter where they live. And I will make it a priority to give our young people a real shot at success with state-of-the-art vocational training in every high school and partnerships with our business leaders to create pathways to the jobs that will help the next generation stay here in Tennessee. So today, I'm hoping you all will come and go with me. Let's go build a better Tennessee together.
All right. And without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panelists for this evening, the wonderful educators that we've brought together to hear more about their perspective as it relates to education in Tennessee. The first panelist I want to introduce is Mr. James Frost. He was born in Abilene, Texas. Mr. Frost earned a bachelor's degree in history from Carson Newman College, where he was an all-conference track and field athlete. Mr. Frost began his teaching career in 1969 at Booker T. Washington in Memphis, Tennessee. Mr. Frost pursued his postgraduate studies at Memphis State. He served for 6 years on the Shelby County Education Association Board of Directors. He also served as the president of the Tennessee Track Coaches Association for 2 years. Welcome, Mr. Frost. Our next panelist, Ms. Jasmine Gregg, has been an educator for 6 years in Nashville, Tennessee, where she has lived for almost 20 years. Ms. Gregg earned her bachelor's degree from Georgetown College and is currently working on a master's degree through Relay. Ms. Gregg teaches third grade literacy and mathematics. Welcome, Ms. Gregg. Our next panelist, Ms. Marika Verge, is from Murfreesboro, Tennessee. Ms. Verge graduated from Middle Tennessee State University. She's an 8th grade honors social studies educator and social studies content lead at Strive Collegiate Academy. Ms. Verge understands the importance of It Takes a Village and wants all of her students to know that she will help them transition in their middle school experience. Welcome, Ms. Verge. Our next panelist, Mr. Marvin Thomas, is a native of Chicago, Illinois. Mr. Thomas earned a bachelor's degree in English from Lane College in Jackson, Tennessee. Mr. Thomas has gained experience in education through the Children's Defense Fund Freedom Schools program and Teach for America, Memphis. Mr. Thomas is entering his 6th year as a teacher at Bluff City High School in Memphis, Tennessee, where he's taught English, personal finance, and journalism. Beyond being an educator, Mr. Thomas is a passionate singer, songwriter, writer, and podcast producer. Welcome, Mr. Thomas. Our next panelist, Miss Melody Hawkins, is a Jackson, Tennessee native and resident of Knoxville, Tennessee. Ms. Hawkins earned her bachelor's degree in microbiology. She also earned a master's degree in educational leadership, as well as a master's degree in curriculum and instruction. In 2020, she was named by the Knoxville Business Journal as one of the 40 under 40 most influential people in Knoxville. In 2019 and in 2021, Ms. Hawkins received the Building Level Teacher of the Year Award. Ms. Hawkins also received the 2021 Knox County Schools Middle School Science Teacher of the Year, and most recently honored as the 2021 National University Teacher of the Year. Welcome, Ms. Hawkins. Our next panelist, Mr. Michael Jossel Jr., is a native of Marks, Mississippi. He earned his bachelor's degree in mass communications from Mississippi Valley State. He earned a master's degree in mass communications from Arkansas State University and a master's in education from Grand Canyon University. He began his teaching career at Atlanta Metro University as an adjunct professor, and in 2013, he began working in the Douglas County School Systems as a U.S. history teacher. Mr. Jossel is currently an 8th grade social studies teacher at Jeter K-8 in Memphis, Tennessee. Mr. Jossel is also the assistant pastor of the Mount Zion Missionary Baptist Church, where Reverend Michael Jossel Sr. is the pastor. Welcome, Mr. Jossel. Our next panelist is Mr. Reggie Jenkins. He earned his bachelor's degree from the University of Tennessee, Knoxville. Mr. Jenkins is the founder and executive director of Unique Academy Incorporated. Unique Academy has worked with over 4,000 youth since its inception. In 2021, Mr. Jenkins opened STEAMY Learning Institute, providing a private tutoring and technology center for African American children. Mr. Jenkins has received the MLK Advocacy Award, Men of Service Award, Distinguished Service Award, and many others. Mr. Jenkins is also a speaker, author, and educational consultant. In 2009, he and fellow author Dr. Daryl Green wrote the book, A Call to Destiny, How to Create Effective Ways to Assist Black Boys in America. Welcome to our very distinguished and dynamic panel. We're so excited to hear from all of you this evening. We're going to get started so that we can maximize our time together. And right now, it's very personal to us, this first question, because we all in some way have been affected. Oh, and my apologies. Let me stop. Let me introduce someone who is highly important to tonight's event. Let me introduce Miss Lynn Whitney, the campaign manager for Mr. J.B. Smiley Jr. Welcome, Miss Whitney. Please, everyone.
Hello, everyone. Hello, everyone. Happy Sunday. Thank you all so much for tuning in, whether you're tuning in via Facebook, via Twitter, via YouTube. We definitely greatly appreciate you all. I wanted to first say thank you all so much for just being here and having your Sunday for an hour with us. And that way we can hear your thoughts on what's currently going on in the school systems, as well as your concerns as a teacher. Thank you also to our Director of Education, Dr. Stephanie Hill. Thank you so much for moderating this panel discussion. Again, thank you all so much for being here. Councilman Smiley will be present at the end of the panel discussion. A few things that I do want to say is, if you all have any questions, those that are watching via Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, you're able to type in the comments any questions you may have. We are monitoring the comments. We may even post your comment here live. So if you have any questions, or if you want to say anything, let us know. Put it in the comments. That way we can address it and we can go from there. So again, thank you so much, Dr. Hill, and thank you so much, teachers, for allowing us to be present and allowing us to do this.
All right. And we are eager to jump in and hear from our teachers this evening. So the first question I wanted to start with is something, again, that has affected all of us, and that's COVID. And I wanted you all to share, a couple of you all to share your perspective about the recent lifting of the mask mandates for some of the Tennessee school districts. So if we could, I'm going to actually start with Mr. Lee Johnson, who just joined us. So I'm going to start with Mr. Lee Johnson. If you can share your perspective about the lifting of the mask mandate.
Yes, good evening, everyone. So, one of the things that I always thought was interesting about lifting of the mask mandates is that it kind of feels it's like everything is back to normal, and it really isn't. My hope is that with the lifting of the mask mandates, with the school that I'm currently at, we have weekly testing. So I hope that a lot of schools, when they lifted the mask mandates, I'm not sure here in Memphis with Shelby County schools, I can only speak for the school I'm currently at, but with Shelby County schools, if they are lifting the mask mandates, that they need to have the option for a lot of students to have the ability to get tested weekly if they're going to do that consistently. Because even though the mask mandates are lifted, COVID is still out there. It's not gone. So I think that that's one of the more important things, is to make sure that that testing is available, whether it's mandatory or optional, at least that we have that ability to have testing available.
Absolutely. Thank you for your perspective, Mr. Johnson. Mr. Frost, can you also speak to your perspective around the lifting of the mask mandate?
Yeah, one thing I think we have a problem with is how we message, and I think Democrats, which I'm a lifelong Democrat, I don't think we do a very good job of defending our position. And on this mask mandate, I remember reading extensively about World War II in England, for example, how people sent their children out of London for 4 and 5 years with people they didn't even know, to protect them from bombing. Now, my point is this: after it was all over, in other words, they were involved in the war for 6 years. Now, can you imagine also the in Europe, the disruption to education for so many European children? But you know what? They seemed to get through it, and they did all right. Well, this is the thing that we ought to be emphasizing. One thing is that, yeah, it's a pain maybe, but it protects our students. There are scientific reasons why we should do it. We're trying to protect others, and we have an obligation to protect our fellow man, for crying out loud. And as far as it being a mandate, again, World War II, you had to ration, and that was mandated by the federal government. I didn't hear about any riots about where's my sugar, where's my gas. You could only use 8 gallons of gasoline per week. Okay, but we don't tell people this. So that's the thing about mandates. All laws are mandates, for crying out loud. I don't think we do a very good job of defending our policies, and in this case, this was rational policy.
Thank you, Mr. Frost. We absolutely appreciate your
Yeah.
perspective on the COVID lifting of the mask mandate. Maybe lastly on this, Ms. Verge, can you weigh in about your perspective around the lifting of the mask mandate?
Sure. I think as of right now, everyone is just kind of going with the flow. We kind of are looking to see what everyone else is doing, and then we either agree or we disagree. And right now, I do believe that with the lifting of the mask mandates, I think that it should definitely still be optional. In my personal opinion, I believe that when we first came back from virtual, we weren't really around a lot of people, but now we're back and we're in person. And then we see kids come in without a mask, and then we see numbers go up immediately. And now that it's lifting, at this point, it's to the point where I don't think that they are considering the adults in the building. We can't, like a school can't run without the adults. And so I think that they need to take that into consideration.
And you all are absolutely right. A school cannot run without the adults. You're absolutely right. So thinking about the impact of COVID, and COVID has not only impacted people's physical health, but it's impacted their mental health. So I want to pivot to a question thinking about whether there needs to be an increase in access to mental health services within schools, and not just for students, but for students, teachers, and staff. And maybe Ms. Hawkins, if you could speak to your perspective about mental health access in schools.
Absolutely. Yes, as an educator, I'm currently an administrator, but I spent 6 years in the classroom. There's absolutely a need for mental health services. And when I speak about mental health, I'm actually referring specifically to trauma-based support. In the past 2 years, the disparities that already existed prior to the pandemic have just been magnified. So this is not something that that has just been a need in the last years during the pandemic. This is something that already existed, certainly in my school community, and I know in others as well. Economic disparities, academic disparities are prevalent at this point in our society, and certainly disparities in access to resources for supporting mental and emotional health. So when there's not easily accessible resources for, if we just talk about our students first, if there's not easily accessible resources for our students, then it requires our educators, our adults in the building, to have to be ready to pivot at any moment into multiple roles: teacher, counselor, coach. And if we're talking about teachers, ed prep programs are focused on providing pre-service teachers with the skill sets that they need to teach, differentiate instruction, and measure achievement, not necessarily supporting pre-service teachers with the skills that they might need to support a student who is experiencing trauma. So basically, we have teachers in the classrooms who want to teach, who want to be successful, but they just don't have that skill set at that time to be a counselor. That's not something that is taught widespread in ed prep programs. So there's definitely a need for more easily accessible mental health support, not only for our students, definitely for our teachers. There's a such thing as secondary trauma, and that is experienced with our teachers and our staff in our schools. So whatever situations our students are coming into the building with, we know that it impacts instruction, and then it also trickles down onto the adults that are supporting them. So that is definitely something that we certainly need to focus on as the education community.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Absolutely. And because Mr. Johnson and Mr. Frost weighed in around the COVID impact, I'm going to pivot back to them to also answer around this question around access to mental health services. So Mr. Johnson, if you could answer, and then Mr. Frost, if you could speak to access to mental health services.
Yeah, so one of the things that I think is very important about the access to mental health, and Ms. Hawkins definitely touched on it, is that the access for the educators as well as the students. At a couple of schools that I've worked at, we did have access to mental health before the COVID situation, but it wasn't as consistent as I'd like it to be. And I think that's the key thing. The key thing is that level of consistency. at the school district that I was at, it would be mental health access once every 3 to 5 weeks. I would see a counselor. And obviously, especially nowadays, that's not enough. So it definitely has to be a level of consistency with that access to mental health because, as we all know, as educators, we give so much of ourselves to the students and we don't have a lot when we get home. So it would definitely be great to have that extra that consistent access. The access is there, but it's just the level of consistency to help us out.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that.
My turn.
Yes, absolutely. Go ahead, Mr.
Okay.
Ross.
Interesting enough, I dated a school psychologist for 8 years. So I got to learn a lot about the problems. They're overwhelmed. We don't have enough school psychologists. And of course, that is a budgetary, problem too, But just to deal with the normal, quote, normal mental health issues that students have. And also, clinical depression runs in my family, and my daughter suffered from it. She's okay now, but it took a long time for us to get through, and she is a college professor now, but she went through it. And when I talked to teachers, when I was going through this, she was a senior in high school. A lot of them didn't buy into it. They thought, just tell her to straighten up, and this and that, And so I think that's part of the problem too, is that we have the large segments of our population that don't understand mental health. Now it's getting better, I think, over the years. This was 20-something years ago when I had to deal with it. So that's two-phase. I think we're not promoting the idea of we need more school psychologists and that we need a better understanding of mental health.
Wow, I appreciate those responses. Absolutely. The importance of consistency, of access for teachers, students, and staff, and additional school psychologists. Absolutely. That's very important. So that actually brings me to a kind of a follow-up question about that, because you're hearing a lot now about social emotional learning, social emotional development. So how important is it to include social emotional learning and development into schools? And for this question, I'd like to go to Mr. Thomas to answer first. So talk to us a little bit about social emotional development from your perspective.
Sure thing. I love this question because, as you all mentioned, with mental health, we're dealing with a crisis, and it's really interesting to me. I don't want to call it trending, but I mean, there's definitely a heightened awareness of the issues that we battle with mental health. So I think what would only benefit us and our children would definitely be social emotional learning, and which will help students, comprehend and understand their emotions, to understand it's okay to feel how you feel, to demonstrate empathy and have understanding for others' emotions. And especially since we're still in the global pandemic, but especially as we have returned in person to classrooms, the need for social and emotional learning is probably more critical than it's ever been. And when implemented in schools, just as an educator, we use it. Shout out to Bluff City High School and Greendale Public Schools with a lot of our advisory lessons. We've seen the impact when students are able to assess their emotions and see how they feel. They make better decisions. And social emotional learning, it challenges you to be self-aware, to manage yourself better, to be socially aware. It enhances your relationship skills and helps you make responsible and wise decision. Research shows that when social emotional learning takes place in schools, the increase of high school graduation happens, readiness for college or career success, more positive relationships, and better mental health. I think it's interesting, as many, a lot of us are adults. And again, to my point earlier, we're experiencing issues with our mental health. So just imagine the impact that many of us would have benefited from having more implementation of social emotional learning in schools.
Absolutely. Thank you, Mr. Thomas. Now, if we could go to Ms. Gregg, can you share your perspective about the importance of social emotional learning and whether we should have that as a part of the school day, school curriculum?
Yes, I think social emotional learning is extremely important in schools, especially after our recent quarantine. As kids are growing, they're still learning more about their world, and that includes learning more about social cues and learning how to navigate social situations. School shouldn't be just like a place where they learn technical knowledge that they need in order to navigate the world. It should also be a place where they continue to build their social language or social toolbox. School is where they should learn how to interact with and how to respond to each other in social situations. It's where kids should be able to really practice and refine how they're interacting with others. And I think that if we do not have social emotional learning in schools, then we're just depriving kids of a huge part of their development. Kids often look to adults on how to handle situations, and this often includes how to handle their own emotions. And school is a place where they can actually get an additional perspective. It's where they're often able to see that it's more than one way of handling a certain situation, or even more than one way of dealing with an emotion. And I just feel like it's our job as adults, as educators, to help children really learn how to navigate their world.
Absolutely, absolutely. I hear your point about the importance of social emotional learning and role modeling as adults in the classroom and adults in the school. Absolutely. Ms. Hawkins, I know social emotional development is something that's near and dear to your heart. Can you also talk about how you feel about social emotional development in the school setting?
Yeah, it's absolutely, definitely something that I'm passionate about. So social emotional learning, it that that are there for learn and thrive in their environment. And so when we're removing those barriers, we're actually increasing their opportunity for academic success. Social emotional well-being of students has to be just as important as it is as academic growth is with our students. It's a necessary component to students, as we've already heard from our panelists, that it helps our students and their emotions, establish positive goals. It helps them form healthy. So ultimately, they're learning how to thrive in society. They're learning how to become positive contributors in their community. And not only are they learning that for their community, but they're also learning how to do this, and they're adding to the culture of their school. They're helping to create an engaging environment, a cooperative environment, one that students can collaborate with each other. They're also learning how to interact better with adults when we're being more intentional about exposing our students to social emotional learning. So it absolutely is. It's like the vehicle. I think of it as a vehicle that helps support mental health. It drives our mental health systems that we're wanting to see be more impactful for our students. Social emotional learning doesn't have to be a separate thing. So in my school, and actually my current school and my past school, we use it as a part of advisory, which was also mentioned by one of our panelists. We use it as a part of our advisory curriculum, but we could also find ways to infuse it into the daily instruction. Something as simple as beginning class every day with having students reflect on positive experiences that they've had throughout their school day. So it doesn't have to be a big, huge chunk of what we're doing in our classrooms, but it absolutely must be something that we are making sure is a part of the learning environment, so that our students can become more social emotionally aware, and they will be able to add to their school climate, their school culture, and to the positive community.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes. Mr. Thomas mentioned the idea of it being baked into advisory at his school. And yeah, I absolutely hear you. The idea that schools are a microcosm of our larger society. So if that's the place where we're giving students the tools, to function in a way that's positive and manage their emotions, and it'll be to the benefit of our communities and to society at large. That's tremendous. Absolutely. the next question I want to pivot to, Ms. Gregg in her response talked about like school's not just a place for the technical learning, of course, it's where we're developing the whole child. But I want to pivot to a question about the inclusion of career and technical training and STEM programming in schools, and whether that's something that we should have a focus on. So for that question, if I could pass it to Mr. Jenkins to speak first to the idea of career and technical training and STEM in schools.
Yes, I think it's especially in this day and age where everything is about to be automated. A lot of jobs are going to be phased out. A lot of jobs that people depending on just graduating high school won't be here in the next 10, 15 years. I was looking at a stat where it's over 1.1 million STEM jobs are going to be needed by the year 2024, and we're not developing the manpower and woman power to fulfill those jobs. And so I think it should not only should be in schools. I believe that you should start in elementary age schools. I wish, my desire is, a lot of our schools need to be revitalized or reinnovated, for lack of a better word, into a 21st century look to where not only our children is getting a social, emotional, mental, needs met, but starting at age 5, 6 years old, you're introduced to the world of STEM. I mean, it's not out of place where you'll see a 6, 7, 8-year-old with a phone, and they can navigate that phone, navigate that iPad. And it's unfortunate that we're not teaching those same children how to create those apps, how to create, how to code. They have simple programs like Scratch that should be integrated in the schools, because everybody's not going to college, but everybody needs to eat. Everybody needs shelter. Everybody needs transportation. And our children are going to be left out in the cold if we don't change how we imagine what education and these things should look like.
Absolutely. And I'm going to out myself that my 7-year-old and my 4-year-old have a phone. So I'm 100% with you. But my daughter is in Code Crew learning how to code via Scratch. So shout out to Code Crew for the fact that my children have phones already. All right. So now I want to go to Ms. Hawkins to share your perspective about the importance of career and technical training and STEM in schools.
Yeah, I have to echo the sentiments of my brother Reggie. It's definitely need. It was my way when I was in the classroom as a science teacher. That's how I kept the learning relevant, because if I don't have something to connect the science that I'm teaching, or if I can't support my students with connecting the math that they're learning with something outside of the school walls, then it's almost meaningless to our students, especially if we're talking about students who are maybe in middle school or upper elementary, and they're just now developmentally, they're getting to a point where they're starting to understand a little bit more about the world around them. So now they need to see some relevancy. So if we're talking about introducing trade and CTE and STEM careers into the classroom, and just giving them a wider range about how this stuff that they're learning applies to the real world, that just helps make the meaning of the learning more relevant and more meaningful to them. Also, when we think about trade and technical careers, STEM careers, we know that school drives the economy. It drives the business sector, and vice versa. What happens in the business sector helps to support and drive the curriculum that we're teaching our students. But I think that sometimes we forget that school also drives what's happening in the economy. And like Reggie mentioned, if we're producing or we have these jobs that are available, but we're not producing the students, the candidates that can go into these careers, then we're going to have all of these empty spots and positions. How can we continue to thrive as a society? Where is the economy going to go? So we have to really start in the schools. And I 100% agree that really waiting until middle school to give students that survey of the different careers and options that are out there is almost too late. We really have to bring it into elementary level for our students so that it needs to be as common as them knowing about a doctor, a nurse, a police officer, and a fireman, right? Or a firewoman. They need to be able to know about different types of careers that are out there in the STEM world as well. And right now, I believe that we're at a very good spot to really push that more in our schools, but teachers need support with curriculum. They need support with being able to navigate that space and help students to know what careers are out there and how it can connect to the learning that's happening in the classroom.
Absolutely. I hear the connection between the business sector and schools and how important that is, and how we need to be really on the forefront of modernizing around with that in mind. So that's wonderful. All right. Ms. Burge, I know this is something that's also important to you. Can you speak to the importance of STEM career and technical training in schools also?
Yeah, so I believe that exposure is everything. And I believe that's one of the things that we are missing in our schools, similar to what Ms. Hawkins and Mr. Reggie said just a minute ago. It's not starting when it's supposed to. We're waiting until 8th grade to give them access to all of these different opportunities to go see these different high schools that have these really great programs that they might love, and they're going to get on there and they're gonna do it. But at the same time, if they're exposed early on, then I think that would really help, especially because if they were to do something, maybe like a job shadow, they can just see how different people interact with one another. One thing that I thought was hilarious was teaching virtually. Kids they miraculously didn't know how to get on Zoom. They didn't know how to do this, that, and the third. However, they're streaming on YouTube, they're on Instagram, they're editing videos on TikTok that I can't even do. These kids are very, very smart. And I think that the fact that we are holding them back, I feel like we are holding them back from being so great. And I think that once we finally find those resources and once we actually fight for what our kids need, then they'll actually get what they need.
Wow. I'm going to say that really resonated. The idea that we're standing in our children's way, we're holding them back from being great in technology in the ways that we know they could be. So that's quite the revelation. Thank you for that. All right. So my next question, I know can be a sensitive topic. And so I want to pivot to something that has been in the news, that has had lots of discussion around it. And I'm going to preface this conversation in saying that I am a critical race theory scholar, and I use critical race theory in my dissertation. Never before then, as a theoretical perspective around the topic that I was covering for my dissertation. Never before that. So I want to ask you all, why do you think critical race theory has become a controversy linked to K-12 education? And what can educators do to honestly discuss history without repercussions? And for this question, first, I want to go to Mr. Jostle to answer and talk about your perspective around critical race theory.
Well, my perspective is the only reason that it's a controversy is the way it's been politicized. If you paid attention to the past election cycle, the governor of Virginia, Governor Youngkin, he would not be in that position if he didn't run off critical race theory. In other words, I think that it's a boogeyman that's been created by some conservatives, and I think it's an attempt to suffocate real dialogue, real conversation. And as a history teacher, as an educator, it kind of puts me on pins and needles, because how do I teach the curriculum that I didn't make, but Tennessee Department of Education made? And an example is Reconstruction. How can I talk about Reconstruction and its wholeness if I have to censor some parts? And I just think that conversation that we don't want to have is coming back to haunt us. Not just that, but Trail of Tears, Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, all of that will be considered to some people critical race theory. We have people that has never been inside a classroom, that they are trying to decide curriculum. If you look at what is going on in Indiana right now as I speak, they have that if a parent alleges that their child has been taught critical race theory, that teacher can lose his license. And I just think right now that we need to take a deep breath and calm down. And just like 2020 with the big election lie, sometimes problems are created so something can be done. I think this is a problem that was created. Critical race theory is very much needed. If you look at the concept of it, it's not attributing racism towards anybody, but we are talking about those social institutions such as the criminal justice system, such as banks. And as a history teacher, we do know about redlining in the 1930s that kept many African Americans are being able to obtain homes. So I just think that this conversation, it has to be heard, and teachers shouldn't have to pay for it. We shouldn't have to pay the price of doing our job, and that's all that we're doing. We're doing our job, but it seems to be roadblocks that are put in by politicians that's trying to get to the White House or get a political position.
Thank you for that. And can I ask you a follow-up question? Because you said being on pins and needles. And my follow-up question is around, would being able to not be in the classroom in the full, most robust way, engage with your students, how could that affect a teacher's longevity in the classroom?
Well, I think you have a lot of teachers there considering, another option, because I think that this is the beginning. I think it's going to become a situation that racism, will no longer be allowed to be taught in the classroom because how it may negatively affect someone. So, I think it's something to reconsider. I know a lot of teachers, a lot of my teacher friends that teach social studies, those are one of the things that we talk about. Well, how do you teach the Trail of Tears without offending anybody? Because history is history. And, a generation which ignores history, you have no past and future. We have to know what happened in the past so how can we be better in the future?
Absolutely. Thank you for that perspective. And thank you for, being vulnerable and honest with us about how it makes you feel as a teacher. Next, I want to go to Mr. Lee Johnson to share your perspective about the impact of critical race theory becoming a topic linked to K-12 education.
Yeah. So first and foremost, when we're talking about K through 12 education, it's something that it's dangerous. We teach things that are dangerous topics. And when it comes to critical race theory, again, like the gentleman previously said, it's been politicized, because if you can recall, I want to say maybe five years ago or so, there was a situation in Texas in which the history books for middle school really kind of glossed over slavery. You know what I mean? And it made it seem like when the slaves came over, they had smiles on their face, and it was like, hey, it's all good. We're here against our will, but we're happy. And so the concept of race has always been kind of glossed over when it comes to education, especially when it comes to middle school. But when it comes to critical race theory, I think that for me personally, because I teach English and I also teach writing, it would be a disservice for me as an educator if I don't push my students to really push the envelope on what they're feeling. And what they want to express with themselves when it comes to race. I love talking about race in the classroom. It is my favorite thing to do, because because it is dangerous, and because we have to push ourselves to be those guides for these children when it comes to certain questions that they have about race that maybe they don't know how to ask because they're in an environment with their peers. So I understand the fear that a lot of my peers have when it comes to that. It's like, ooh, can I do this? Because, CRT stuff. But I often challenge them, and I often tell them, I got your back. If you want to do this, I will help you with this particular lesson, and I will sell it to not only admin, but I will sell it to the parent. And I think that's another thing too. If we can actually sell what we're doing to the parents, if we have that parent interaction, I think a lot of these situations will kind of just be swept under the rug, because once the parents know what we're doing, and if they advocate for it or if they are against it, we can modify what we can teach to the kids.
Absolutely. I just wanted to pause for a second on something that you said, in the idea of talking about something being dangerous. Wow. As a society, as a school, as Americans, just to have a conversation about something is dangerous. Is that what we're teaching our students? Wow. Thank you for that. Thank you for that. Mr. Thomas, can you also speak to critical race theory and how it impacts you as an educator in the classroom?
Certainly. I mean, ditto what the gentleman before myself spoke. I think it's really interesting. And as you mentioned, Dr. Hill, this was a part of your dissertation. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Is critical race theory actually taught in schools, K through 12?
No,
No. So I think there's this misconception that that's what's being taught. We're talking about a graduate school level course, or a graduate school level coursework or analysis or study. In my opinion, it is nothing but a scare tactic. It is nothing but a way to say, hey, Big Brother is watching you. It's putting fear in teachers to not speak about race, and it's meant to make a specific group of people comfortable. And without discomfort, there can be no growth. So I find it very interesting that there are policymakers and parents throughout, the state of Tennessee and the other states mentioned, that are expressing their issue with critical race theory that's not even being taught. Secondly, you don't want to have a conversation with the descendants of the folks that this has affected. So I think that that's very problematic. That's an issue. So I say this to say, from my understanding, and you all can go and look at what the governor has listed as, inappropriate to discuss in classrooms. But essentially, what they're asking teachers not to do is say, hey, this specific group of people are not responsible for. Let me retry. I want to go a different direction, and then I'll be done. I believe what they don't want us to do is to basically say white people are bad, if I can be blatantly honest. And that is not what's being taught when we have these discussions about race. We have to acknowledge history, and it's not as simple as black and white. We live in a country that was stripped from its native people, etc. So I will close by saying I believe there is still opportunity for us to teach history and to be honest about history, to Mr. Johnson's point, to have discourse and to have conversations about the reality and the truth. But I don't see the bill as something, I think it's a scare tactic, but I don't see it saying you cannot teach history.
Thank you. Absolutely. And we appreciate your honest perspective and being able to speak freely. I want to take one last comment about critical race theory before we pivot to our next question. Mr. Jenkins, can you also speak to your perspective around critical race theory in schools?
Well, first of all, I think we got to get a clear understanding. Correct me, Dr. Hill, if I'm wrong. Critical race theory started in the 70s by the writings of Derek Bell in his writings.
You're correct.
And it was about how like the civil rights advancements at the times were being reversed. And so legal scholars and everybody started writing these concepts. That's first thing. So I want people to understand that. Now, I'm gonna say this because I'm coming from the other part of, I'm an educator, but I'm creating my own school and all that kind of institution for our elementary age kids. Dr. Clark, John Henry Clark, said the true purpose of education is for the student to be a proper handler of power, not a manager, but a handler. And so when you talk about this, we're talking about a group, a power structure who is like afraid of the rug being pulled under them. And that's the truth, that's education or whatever. First of all, and it's ironic that they're coming at us like that, because race is a social construct that was created by their ancestors, not us. We didn't create the term race. That was used to justify what our ancestors went through. And so this is just like, I look at this as like Custer's last stand. America, the world is changing. And those who are in power are afraid, definitely afraid of losing power. That's what all this is about. Because if you can control a child's thinking, you can control what's going on in a child, you can create a powerful being. So they want to eliminate a lot of this stuff out of the schools. My thing is, it's got to be more effort, not only in the schools to fight in the schools, but a lot of times we're talking about history and stuff. We can. What's going on after school? What's going on Saturdays? What's going on? You know, all these other times our children have. That the community can be a more asset to us in this particular fight, because as teachers, you really cannot in the schools. You can't. Most teachers are not gonna. They're not going to jeopardize their salaries and their careers for this, and it's going to be very hard to dangle that line, because it's going to get to a point where if this is law, people are not going to touch that subject. So we're going to have to complement what's going on in the classroom by what can go on at home, at the churches, community centers, you know, organizations. We can all be in, and this, we can make this a moot point, because we're in a battlefield. This critical race theory, I mean, the term was coined in the 70s, but what it was talking about, this has been ongoing for centuries. This fight for our children's mind. You know, Napoleon said, the victor writes history. Whoever wins writes history. And so this is just an ongoing war that we're going to have to come up with other avenues to make sure our children know who they are and know where they're coming from and know what world they're living in.
Thank you, Mr. Jenkins. It sounds like you're very much advocating for community level education and the importance of, you know, the school being the center of a community and having additional auxiliary services that help support the education of children in a community. So thank you for that. For the sake of time, I want to ask everyone on the panel to ask this last question. So if everyone can keep the response to maybe 1 minute, but I really want to make sure that if there are any other challenges or concerns that you have as a teacher that you feel like your perspective isn't being heard about, that you have this opportunity to share what that challenge, concern, or perspective is that, you know, we want our administrators, we want our policymakers to know and understand. And I'm going to start with Mr. Frost, and I'm going to give everyone just a moment to respond, whether you have another challenge or concern that we should be considering. So I'll start with Mr. Frost.
Thank you. Number one in my book is we in Tennessee or in the United States, whatever you want, should guarantee that every classroom in every school has a proper learning environment. Now, what is that? It's pretty simple. I'm talking about proper discipline. And this is something we have, ever since I've been a teacher from 1969, I have seen the standards for what is acceptable behavior by a student go down considerably. If you can't get their attention, if you can't maintain their attention, you can't teach them anything. It doesn't, it all starts there. And I've seen a lot of people, teachers, good teachers, who gave up, because of it was hard to control the classroom. They were not getting support from the administration. And, you know, it was like, we have to save, you know, everybody. Well, by trying to save everybody, you end up not helping anybody really. So to me, number one is we need to have that standard. If a teacher cannot maintain control of the classroom because of unruly students, it doesn't, you know, somebody needs to come in and guarantee that will be the case.
Thank you, Mr. Frost. I appreciate your perspective. All right, Ms. Gregg, can you share if there are any other concerns for you?
Yes, I think that one of the things I wanted to touch on was book banning. And I just believe that recent attempts at book banning is just indicative of like what we do as humans. It's easier for us to shy away from tough conversations instead of actually having those conversations with our kids. And I firmly believe that for better or worse, literature reflects the time that it's written in, and when used correctly, it can be a great tool for us to actually learn from the past. And instead of banning books, we should utilize these books as a catalyst for societal growth. Understanding our history and examining our choices, the choices of our ancestors, will really enable children to just have the insight that they need to make decisions that will actually just build a better future for their children. And so I think that we need to be prepared to have like tough conversations about certain things that kids are reading instead of just banning it all together. I think this just echoes back to what was said earlier about critical race theory. Like, it's all about how we talk to students, how we equip them with, you know, the tools to actually process the knowledge and use it in a productive way.
Thank you, Ms. Gregg. Very eloquently put. Thank you so much for that additional feedback. Ms. Verge, do you have some additional concerns or something else that we should be considering?
I couldn't really think of too much. The only thing that I did want to touch base on is that I know we didn't really talk too much on, is when we walk into the schools, our students look at us and we are so many things to them. We're the nurse, we're the moms, we're the dads, we're the aunts, we're the uncles. And I think a lot of times in the education system, just as a whole, I think adults believe that we're superheroes. And I like to think that I'm a superhero sometimes, but if I had a never-ending source battery in my back that could keep me going all through the weekend, I could work on the weekends, come back in on Monday, fresh and ready to go. I think that I would be a superhero, but I think that a lot of people need to understand that we are people, we are adults, and we are not just teachers. We are other things to other people, and our time is precious. And I think that just needs to be one thing that needs to be considered.
Wow, absolutely. I think I heard a collective amen and hallelujah go up and claps go up in the background. All right, Mr. Thomas.
Certainly, I'll be brief. I don't know if anybody else wants to say it, but I don't mind saying it. I was listening to a podcast earlier. I think it's called the Teachers Edition. And they were talking about the teacher shortage. Great teachers are leaving the classroom. Something has to be done. Whether, I mean, let's be honest, educators are not paid for the job that they do. So an increase of teachers' pay, is that a possibility in the state of Tennessee? In addition to that, is there an opportunity, should educators, like I said, I was inspired by this podcast, why are educators paying back student loans? And I don't know if that's a state issue or if that's a federal issue. But if you're giving back, if you're dedicating and being of service to the future leaders, if you love teachers as much as you say you love them, there needs to be more incentives to keep good teachers in the classroom and to recruit more teachers. So those will be my two points.
Well, thank you. Step out there. Say it. Say what you feel. Thank you so much, Mr. Thomas. Mr. Jostle.
Just one point. I would like more enrichment programs after school. I know sometimes we have tutoring, but a big problem that I'm seeing as a teacher is an uptick in bullying. And I think with the year of them being on virtual, a lot of them, they don't understand, how to communicate with their peers. And they need more activities. The kids need more activities to do. My mom ran a nonprofit, Youth Opportunities Unlimited, and we dealt with underprivileged kids. And it did wonders just for them leaving South Memphis for a weekend, going on a camping trip, going fishing for the first time, going to a Grizzlies game. I think it would do so much for them, for their behavior and their academics. That's my only point that I think that we need, especially at a school system so large as Memphis. A lot of my students, they've never really left South Memphis. They couldn't even tell you what Gatlinburg is, any part of East Tennessee, because that's all they know. So just more resources that we can, show them the world so they can in turn do better.
Awesome. Thank you, Mr. Jostle. All right, Mr. Johnson.
So going back to what I said a little bit earlier about education being dangerous and the concept of everything being dangerous, as an educator and as a part of administration, I really feel like we should not be afraid to fail these children. Currently, in a lot of school districts, it's very difficult to fail them. Sometimes they need to fail so that they can go to summer school or whatever and understand that this is only a minor setback. They need to get that because this concept of reteaching, in my opinion, it doesn't really seem to be working a lot. So there is a lot of fear when it comes to educators and when it comes to administration about failing students so that they have to repeat a grade or repeat a class, et cetera, et cetera. We need to get beyond that. I failed so many classes when I was in high school, class of 96. What's up? Generation X, let's go. And it made me a better student. It really did, because I had to push myself and go to summer school and all of those different things. Now we live in this era of No Child Left Behind and all of that stuff, but we sometimes they need to be left behind a little bit so that we can go forward.
Absolutely. And thank you for your vulnerability and sharing, the truth of your situation and how that impacted you as an adult, and how you made a way out of no way. So we appreciate you being vulnerable. And last but not least, Mr. Jenkins.
Yeah, I think we got to get back to the basics. What everybody say, I echo their sentiments. Reading, writing, arithmetic. We was talking about STEM earlier. A lot about, the stats about our children and their reading ability, their writing ability, their math ability to compute. I think that we do have to have more extracurricular activity. Enrichment, after school enrichment programs and summer programs. I do a summer school in Tennessee, 7-week summer school, and we focus on academics. And I do it with elementary school students, and it does wonders for those who are behind, and we got to de-emphasize the entertainment and the sports, because there's so many of our children thinking they're only going to make it through these three avenues: entertainment, athletics, and that kind of stuff. And we got to show them that there are other avenues, more realistic avenues, to compete out here in the world and be the person you was created to be. So I think those things are very critical. I just think more, because too much we putting a lot on the teachers and the schools, and it's just not realistic. I think teachers are doing a great job. We need more community support. We need more people advocating on teachers' part, to and getting in the schools to help the teachers and utilize people who are experts in the community. Why can't we, if we having a teachers shortage, why can't we utilize a person who is an electrical engineer to come in and teach a class, or this person who's specialized in this, and just do a workshop once a week or something to help offset that shortage?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I want to say a big thank you to everybody on our panel this evening. I appreciate your feedback, your honesty, your transparency, the courage that you brought to this conversation, and the insights that we really all need to have. So I appreciate y'all so much for being willing to give up your time, because I know Sunday is Monday Eve, so it is quite a thing to ask a teacher on a Sunday evening to get on a panel and talk about school. So I truly appreciate all of you all. I commend you all on the difficult work that you do, the necessary work that you do to change lives, to encourage our children, to develop our children. As someone who has been an educator in the classroom, I know it is hard work. Okay, it is absolutely hard work. As Marvin said, teachers do not get paid nearly enough, and we need to do all that we can to pay you your worth, because you're worth your weight in gold. I appreciate all of you all. I will say goodnight to you all. I think JB Smiley Jr. is going to be, I'm going to turn it back over to Miss Whitney, and she'll give us some instructions.
All right. Thank you so much, Dr. Hill. I wanted to say thank you for being our moderator, and also for joining Team Smiley as well. Again, we say thank you all for being present here on Sunday. Right now, we're just going to ask if everyone is able to go ahead and like our social media pages. If you all have not liked our social media page, then we are, first is Facebook. You can go on Vote JB Smiley to join us via Facebook. And then we also have our Twitter page. And you can go to JB Smiley Jr. on Twitter, as well as our Instagram, JB Smiley Jr. as well, and YouTube. Just search his name, JB Smiley Jr. Again, we appreciate you all for tuning in. Councilman Smiley has actually joined in, so I know he wants to say some things again. Thank you, Dr. Hill. You are amazing, and thank you all as well for joining us. Let me add Councilman Smiley.
I'll take the extra title. Can everyone hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, but I don't see you.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So first of all, I just want to thank each and every one of you for participating in the panel. To Ms. Hawkins, Ms. Gregg, Mr. Reggie, Marvin, Michael, Mr. Frost. So good to see you again, Mr. Johnson, Ms. Burge. And thank you, Dr. Hill, for putting this together. And shout out to the best campaign manager on this side of the Mississippi, Lynn, as well. I really, when we talk about education, a lot of times what we do as elected officials and policymakers, we have conversations with our colleagues, but we don't bring the teachers into the conversation. We don't bring the parents into the conversation. So as we attempt to reimagine what education looks like in the state of Tennessee, I'm not saying that we're going to necessarily give you a seat at the table. You are the table. You're going to create the policy as we move forward. You're going to create the formula as we move forward, because who knows better to how to educate our children, what's going on in the classroom, better than the teachers who are there actually hands-on every single day. So thank you all for participating. I can't wait for the next one. I'm going to join in on the next one. I'm going to share some of my thoughts, and y'all can tell me all the reasons I'm wrong. But seriously, thank you all for this, and thank you everyone for tuning in, those on Twitter, those on Facebook, and I'm looking forward to the next one and back in the hands of the best campaign manager on this side of the Mississippi, Lynn.
Thank you, Councilman Smiley. Again, thank you all again for just having your Sunday with us for an hour and 5 minutes. But thank you all again. And we definitely enjoyed this conversation. This will not be the last time that we have these types of conversations. I know it can be challenging sometimes, and sometimes you can be afraid to just voice your opinion on why you have certain concerns in the classroom, and even the challenges that you face as a teacher. And I hate that we have to go through this. I'm an educator myself, so I've included myself in this discussion, but I hate that we have to have our silence. We have to be silenced at times when we're really the spokesperson for our children. We're really the spokesperson for education. So thank you all again. Again, I say, if you are not following us, make sure you follow us on all social media platforms. If you would like to know more about our campaign, you can go to votejbsmiley.com. If you would like to donate, you can also go to votejbsmiley.com. We definitely greatly appreciate that. And again, thank you, teachers. If I had my button, I have a button that has the applause. If I had it on me, I would have pressed it, but y'all can get the air claps for right now. But thank you all again. Until next time, y'all have a great Sunday evening and be blessed.